Today we're going to continue and see what has happened now with Van Helsing, because he had an idea. He was thinking something wasn't right with everything that was going on. And so when Mina Harker wrote in her journal, she said, okay, we have to see now what's going on. And Van Helsing said, I read Jonathan Harker's journal and my suspicions were confirmed. I always knew that vampires existed. Now I have. Welcome. Chapter 6. Dr. Sewards Journal. September 26th. Things were just starting to return to normal. When Van Helsing burst into my office, waving a copy of Westminster Gazette, the newspaper. What do you think of that? He asked, pointing to an article about missing children who had been found with wounds on their necks. Well, I said, it sounds like what happened to poor Lucy. Hello from India, welcome. And what do you make of that? I suppose that whatever injured Lucy injured the children too, I replied. Van Helsing gave me a stern look. Do you mean to tell me, John, that after everything we've witnessed, you still haven't figured out what happened to Lucy? You still don't know why she lost so much blood? I shook my head. You are a clever man, John, said Van Helsing as he sat down next to me, but you think too logically. You have to realize that there are things in this world that are beyond science and reason. Professor, I don't understand. Do you know what vampires are, John? Van Helsing interrupted him. His question took me by surprise. Vampires? You mean blood-sucking monsters? Pfft, they don't really exist. Do they? The professor nodded slowly. I have spent my whole life researching the supernatural. Vampires do exist, John, and one of those evil beings drank Lucy's blood and turned her into a vampire too. Professor, I exclaimed, what are you talking about? It couldn't be more obvious, said Van Helsing. Lucy is the mysterious woman who kidnapped all those children. She needs their blood to survive. I sat there stunned, unable to speak. Professor, are you mad? I asked. I wish I was, he responded. No, unfortunately, everything I am saying is true, and I can prove it if you let me. So here's the professor in the office having this conversation because he doubted what was going on with Lucy. And yet Van Helsing had this proof, but still he didn't want to believe it. Now you know that saying, seeing is believing. Let's see what's going to happen. I wasn't quite sure what to say. Come with me to the Westerner tomb, said Van Helsing. But why? I asked. Please, just trust me. It was almost dark by the time we reached the graveyard. The professor unlocked the door of the tomb and then lit a small candle. He searched for Lucy's coffin, and when he found it, he began to unscrew the lid. I was horrified. What are you doing? I exclaimed. When I open this coffin, I'm even getting a little bit nervous. You will see that what I've been saying is true, said Van Helsing. The professor urged me to look inside, and to my great surprise, I saw that the coffin was empty. She is out hunting for her next victim, said Van Helsing. Maybe the body was stolen, I suggested. Van Helsing sighed. Oh, so you need more proof? Fine. We will return again tomorrow. He closed the coffin and blew out the candle. Then we left the tomb and locked the door behind us. September 27th. I reluctantly accompanied the professor to the graveyard again. I expected to find the coffin empty and was shocked to see Lucy inside it. Her cheeks were plump and rosy, and her mouth was stained with blood. The professor pulled back her lips to reveal a set of long, sharp teeth. This is how she made the holes in the children's throats. Now do you believe me, John? I nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose I do. The professor was delighted to see that I was starting to accept his terrifying theories. So what do we do now? I asked. Lucy is neither alive nor dead. She is undead and must be destroyed. I am going to cut off her head, fill her mouth with garlic, and drive a stake through her heart. The professor's words made me shudder. Let's take a look. So here they found her in the coffin, and he's showing the plump rosy cheeks and the fangs and a little bit of, oh, she didn't clean her blood from her mouth. And what do you think they're going to do next? Well, first, I'm going to send a telegram to Arthur, said Van Helsing. I want him to be here when we kill her. Right? I mean, that's the right thing to do. September 29th. Arthur met us at my office this evening. The professor explained his theory of the undead to him and told him that we had to cut Lucy's head off. The professor added that Lucy had to be killed so that her soul could be freed from evil. Arthur was understandably shocked and a bit furious. I mean, that's his fiancée. We're going to cut her head off. Right? We managed to calm him down and eventually persuaded him to come Okay, thank you for that comment. Let me take a look. Give me a moment. Okay. We arrived at the graveyard just before midnight. Van Helsing unlocked the tomb and lit a lamp. Then he opened the coffin, and it was empty. We decided to hide in the graveyard and wait for Lucy to return. Arthur looked pale and anxious, and I must admit, I felt very sorry for him. "Look," said the professor. We turned around to see him pointing in the direction of a white figure holding a small child. As the figure came closer, we clearly saw that it was Lucy herself. There was blood on her lips and on her clothes. When Lucy saw us, she growled like a wild animal. Her eyes were full of rage, and she threw the child to the ground. The child screamed, and Arthur stared at Lucy in horror. She moved towards Arthur, her arms outstretched. "Come to me," she said. "Leave the others and come to me. We will rest together." Arthur looked like he was in a trance. He started walking slowly towards Lucy. "No!" cried Van Helsing as he ran between them, waving a cross. Lucy jumped back when she saw the cross and disappeared into the tomb. We took the child to safety and then returned home. This afternoon, we returned to Lucy's tomb for the last time. Arthur decided that it was his duty to drive the stake through Lucy's heart. It's only fit. I mean, he's the fiancé, right? "Brave lad," said Van Helsing as he placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. And here she is, with her outstretched arms, trying to persuade him to come to her. Just remember that you are doing this to save Lucy's soul. Arthur positioned the stake over Lucy's heart, then hit it hard with a hammer. Lucy's body jerked wildly, and she screamed. Her mouth filled with blood. No, I'm not going to do that. And then she was still. Arthur dropped the hammer. He began to shake and gasp for breath. I guided him out of the tomb and into the warm sunlight while Van Helsing cut the head off the body and filled the mouth with garlic. The professor locked the tomb, then handed the key to Arthur. "There is still more work to be done," he said. "We must find the vampire who is responsible for all of this and destroy him." "Do you both promise to help me with this task?" Arthur and I promised to help the professor, and we made arrangements to meet again in 2 days to discuss our plan. Chapter 7. Dr. Sewards Journal, October 1st. Van Helsing sent a telegram to Lucy's friends, the Harkers, asking them to come to London immediately. The professor believes that they will be able to help us in our quest. Mina Harker came to my office as soon as she arrived. She told me that her husband was gathering vital information in Whitby and that he is expected to arrive tomorrow. We talked briefly, and then she asked me to tell her about the circumstances surrounding Lucy's death. I spent most of the day reading the journal as we exchanged journals and exchanged notes. In fact, I could not tear myself away from the journal. It was a shocking story indeed, reading what happened with Jonathan. But the most disturbing part was when I realized that Dracula's residence, Carfax, is situated right next to the asylum and next to my home. Mina came back to my office earlier this evening. She looked sad, and I was sure that she was crying. We spoke for a bit, then she volunteered to type out the information in both journals. October 2nd. Jonathan Harker, Van Helsing, and Arthur arrived at the asylum this afternoon. I suggested that we meet at my house this evening. Later that day, we all had dinner together at 6 p.m. And 2 hours later, we held a meeting in my study. I assume you have all read the documents that Mina typed up. We all nodded. So here they are getting ready for their plan of how to destroy who? That's right, Dracula. "Let's discuss what we know," said Van Helsing. "There is no doubt that vampires do exist. Yes. They are immortal and extremely powerful. Yes. But they need blood to survive. Unfortunately, yes. We know that Dracula is their leader and that he can easily change form. He can transform himself into a dog, like during the day, and that's when he sleeps in a box of Transylvanian soil. But Dracula has a weakness too. Garlic flowers and crosses render him powerless. A branch of wild rose placed on his box will prevent him from getting out of it. He can be killed either by cutting off his head or by stabbing him in the heart. Jonathan has discovered that most of the boxes on the Demeter were delivered to the chapel at Carfax. The remaining boxes were sent to a different location where we're not sure where. It is our duty to find each and every box and cleanse it by placing a cross on it. Then we must kill Dracula. The professor looked at us intently. My friends, we have no time to waste. We must go to his house immediately. October 3rd, 5 a.m. We decided it would be best to leave Mina at my house. Then, armed with garlic wreaths and crosses, we went to Dracula's estate. When we found the chapel, Van Helsing forced the door open and we followed him inside. The smell, oh man, it was horrible. And the chapel was filled with dust and cobwebs. We lit our lamps and counted the boxes. There were 29 boxes. We were just about to start cleansing the soil in the boxes when we noticed something moving in the darkness. To our horror, we realized that the chapel was filling up with rats. Needless to say, we raced home as quickly as we could. So here, when they were ready to do their job, all these rats started coming out towards them. I can't remember what time I fell asleep last night, but it was definitely before the men returned home. I remember being woken by a scratching noise outside. I got up and looked out the window, but there was nothing there. I went back to bed and had a very strange dream. I was asleep in the dream, and a man was leaning over me. His face was white and his eyes were red as fire. I didn't tell Jonathan about the dream. He left early this morning. He's determined to find out where the other boxes are. So this is Mina Harker's journal now, and she's describing what's happening after the men didn't kill Dracula. I've been feeling weak and kind of dizzy all day. I hope I'm better soon. Chapter 8. The 3rd of October. Jonathan managed to track down the man who delivered the boxes to Carfax. The man said that the remaining boxes were delivered to a house in Piccadilly, and he gave Jonathan the address. We must cleanse the boxes at both locations as soon as possible. Mina looked very tired today. She said she didn't sleep well last night. Poor girl, she must have been feeling quite anxious. The 4th of October. Van Helsing and I were discussing our plan in my office earlier this evening when we heard what sounded like a scream coming from the Harker's room. We went upstairs and knocked on the door, but no one answered. We tried to open the door, but it was locked. I forced the door open, and then I saw the most horrific scene imaginable. The room was dark, but in the moonlight, I saw Jonathan unconscious on the bed. Mina was next to him, and there was a man standing over her. He had a wound on his chest, and she was sucking blood from his wound. The man turned to face us, and we recognized him instantly. It was... Who was it? Yes, it was Dracula. He looked furious. He pushed Mina away and moved rapidly towards us. Van Helsing held up his cross, and Dracula stopped in his tracks. And I lost my place, but now I have found it. Then a strange blue mist filled the room, and the vampire vanished. Mina's white nightdress was stained with blood, and she began to cry. Van Helsing woke Jonathan up, and the poor man could hardly believe his eyes when he saw his wife. What happened? What does all this blood mean? He asked. He leaned forward to touch Mina, but she pulled back. No, she wailed. Don't touch me! I am unclean! Jonathan put his arms around her and held her tightly. Don't say that, Mina, he said. Mina began to calm down, and Van Helsing asked her to describe what happened. Now take a look at this. This is really... Oh. So there's Dracula. Jonathan is just passed out on the bed. And there's Mina. Wait, there's too much glare. There you go. She's just like, oh, you have a wound on your chest. Let me just... And she's sucking the blood from his chest. Yes, it's a little graphic. This is Dracula. I mean, you know, it's not a bedtime story. Well, she began. We were both asleep when I heard a noise. I opened my eyes and saw a blue mist in the room. A tall, thin man came out of the mist, and I knew who he was immediately. I screamed. Ah! But he covered my mouth and told me not to make a noise or he would kill my husband. He must have put me in some kind of trance because I couldn't move or speak after that. He put a spell on Jonathan. Then he said, "You're all fools to think you can destroy me. Your friends underestimated my power, and now I am taking my revenge. When I visited you last night, Mina, I made you part of my vampire family. Drink from me. Drink." Mina began to sob. He forced me to drink blood from his wound. Oh, what have I done? What have I become? A vampire. We listened to Mina's story and tried to comfort her. Van Helsing and I then left the room. I returned to my room but couldn't sleep, obviously. Later, after breakfast, Van Helsing suggested that we cleanse the boxes at Carfax immediately and then move on to Piccadilly. We must act during the day when Dracula is at his weakest. He gave Mina a cross to keep her safe, and then Jonathan, Arthur, Van Helsing, and I went on our way. We found the chapel and the boxes of soil exactly as we had left them. "Now we begin our work," said Van Helsing. We unscrewed the lids of the boxes and placed a cross in each one. Then we closed the boxes and covered them with branches of wild rose. "It is this Transylvanian soil that keeps Dracula alive," Van Helsing explained. "Now that the soil has been cleansed, Dracula will not be able to sleep in these boxes anymore." We closed the chapel door, then headed to the house in Piccadilly. The house was charming, gave no hint of evil inside. Jonathan broke the lock on the front door and we entered. We explored the house cautiously, afraid that the monster would appear before us. We found the remaining boxes in the dining room and cleansed them. Then we discovered that one box was missing. While we were discussing the possible location of the last box, we heard footsteps. Yes, footsteps in the corridor. My heart began to race. Mine would too. And I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The footsteps became louder, and then the dining room door burst open. Guess what? Dracula stood before us, his eyes full of rage. Instinctively, I held up a cross and watched in surprise as he backed into a corner. "You will be sorry," he cried. "You think you have left me without a place to rest, but you are wrong. I have more boxes. My revenge has just begun. I will take the woman you love and make them all vampires." Dracula then jumped out of the window and disappeared. We hardly had time to react. Van Helsing was the first to speak. "We have learned something here today. He fears us." Yes, he does. Despite his angry words, he fears us. "We must find the last box, but first let us go back to Mina. She needs our protection." Here's a little scared Dracula. He's going to jump out the window and disappear. Oh, there he is. So, what do you think is going to happen next? We are going to find out next week, as it is Halloween Friday next week. Are they going to be able to kill Dracula? Or is Dracula 2 steps ahead of the men trying to kill him? What do you think? Find out next week at 6 o'clock.